Emma Langston squints into the morning sun, only to spot a bright pink slip fluttering on her windshield, a $200 HOA citation. She stared at it like it might dissolve if she blinked long enough. It didn't. It just danced slightly with the breeze, tucked snugly under her windshield wiper. Her fingers closed around the paper. Warm from the Arizona heat. Stiff. Official. The kind of pink that looked cheerful from a distance but menacing up close. The curb hadn't changed. The concrete was still cracked in the same spot near the edge. Her car was parked where it always had been, just a foot farther forward than usual. A foot. She stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked slowly up the front path of the house. The porch was as familiar as ever, 2 chipped terracotta planters with basil and rosemary, a wicker bench with a navy cushion. She could still smell the iced tea her mother made that morning, now sweating in glasses on the little side table. Cicadas buzzed lazily from the trees. Inside, her father was kneeling by the dining room sideboard, organizing old financial statements into neatly labeled folders. Emma held out the citation silently. George Langston took the slip, adjusted his glasses, and read it aloud without inflection. Section 12C. Frontage obstruction. Vehicle parked beyond approved boundary. He hummed slightly. They've updated the phrasing. Last time it was visual inconsistency. Emma sank into a chair. It's our own curb. Literally our house. I parked there when I was 17. Ruth looked up from the newspaper, her hair pulled back in its usual morning knot, a teacup resting on her palm. They've started again. Emma turned to her. Again? Ruth nodded. Sharon's done this before. With the Jacksons 2 streets over. Citations for fence paint. Flower color. 1 week it was a birdbath. Emma frowned. That sounds made up. HOA doesn't make things up, Ruth replied calmly. They find obscure rules no one's read and weaponize them. George had already pulled the HOA binder from the bookshelf, its white spine slightly yellowed, tabs sticking out like bookmarks in a legal novel no one wanted to read. He flipped through it, tracing the entries with a finger as if it were a mortgage document. Here, he said. All vehicles must maintain a 2-foot distance from community pathways unless otherwise approved. He closed the binder with a soft thud. Technically, she's right. That doesn't make it sane, Emma muttered. The next day, the Langstons attended the community's so-called beautification circle, a term coined by Sharon Huxley when she took over the HOA presidency the previous spring. It was held in the multipurpose room of the community center, where someone had placed a bowl of half-melted peppermints near the coffee urn. Sharon stood at the front, a vision of symmetry in beige and pearls. Her voice was honeyed with just the right amount of brittle. Uniformity, she said, pacing slowly before a bulletin board covered in neighborhood maps, is how we preserve property values. When residents take liberties, even small ones, it creates disorder. And disorder leads to weeds, Tommy Caldwell called out from the back, eliciting a ripple of chuckles. Sharon didn't laugh. Leads to uncertainty, she corrected. Emma glanced around. Neighbors smiled tightly, nodding along. No one questioned. Not out loud. Back home, Ruth sat on the porch, flipping through a legal pad. These citations aren't random, she said. They're calculated. Someone's watching closely. George, sipping iced tea beside her, shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe Sharon just likes control. Emma looked toward the street. The same driveway where her grandfather used to park the Buick, the one that left oil stains in the shape of Arizona. He'd always say, "It's just a driveway, but it's ours." That simple claim had never been up for debate. Until now. That evening, after dinner, Emma stood by the living room window with the lights off. The cicadas had quieted. The street was empty except for a woman standing across it, clipboard in hand. Sharon. She wasn't writing. Not exactly. She was staring at the Langston house, then scribbling, then pausing, then staring again. The porch light flickered as if sensing something out of place. Emma stepped back, heart ticking faster, even as she told herself it was silly. But Sharon stayed. Watching. Writing. A second citation appears on their mailbox the next morning, for faded paint. Tommy Caldwell waves a pink slip in the air, got one too. For wind chimes, he huffs. Guess the breeze is offensive now. The paper fluttered as he shook it, the ink already smudging in the dry heat. Emma stood beside him in front of Betty's diner, still holding a to-go cup of coffee. The sidewalk underfoot had faint traces of pastel chalk where neighborhood kids had drawn sunflowers just yesterday. Today, it was scrubbed clean, leaving only ghost outlines behind. Inside the diner, Geraldine passed a lemon pound cake across the counter to Edna, the waitress who never needed a notepad. A bingo flyer hung crooked on the community bulletin board, Thursdays, 6 p.m., church rec room, in fading red ink. Did you know, Tommy continued, slipping his citation into his shirt pocket, that my chimes have hung there since '02? Same melody. My late wife picked them out. Sharon says they disturb auditory harmony. He chuckled. What's that even mean? Emma smiled faintly, but her grip on her coffee tightened. It means the HOA has too much time. That week, the Langstons received 3 more citations. One for mailbox non-uniformity despite it being HOA issued. Another for improper shade of mulch. And one for an unauthorized planter, the rosemary Ruth used in almost every dinner. The newsletter arrived with a cheery sunflower on the header and a lengthy section titled, Preserving the Crescent Glen Image. It listed infractions, newly emphasized standards, and a reminder that repetition of minor violations may indicate disregard for communal order. Emma sat in the living room that afternoon, flipping through the newsletter with a red pen in hand. You'd think we were vandalizing the place, not planting herbs. George didn't respond. He was quiet, reading a yellowed map in the corner of the dining room, his glasses low on his nose. Ruth entered with a new stack of mail and paused as she noticed the map. You're looking at parcel lines. Just trying to understand who owns what, George said without looking up. Emma stared at him. Is something wrong? He tapped a square on the corner of the map. This street segment. From the corner to our driveway. What about it? It's not HOA owned. Not exactly. It's under a municipal lease. Temporary access rights. Emma leaned in. How temporary? George flipped another page, a faded form with a clerk's stamp from 1998. 25-year term. It expires next month. Emma sat back slowly. You're serious? He nodded once, calmly. They've been enforcing regulations on land they don't fully control. That changes the dynamic. Later that evening, she created a new blog under a pseudonym, Crescent Watch. Its first post featured side-by-side photos, one of Geraldine's banner with the American flag and fall leaves, the other of the pink citation taped crookedly on her screen door. The title read, A Flag Too Festive? Anonymous stories poured in, submissions about Sharon's crusade against inconsistent mailbox curvature, children's bikes left leaning too long, and patio furniture deemed aesthetic hazards. Emma curated, posted, and made the tone just sharp enough to sting but soft enough to pass as neighborly concern. The blog quietly gained attention. Not viral, but visible. Lindsay Huxley read each post silently on her tablet in the back booth of Betty's diner. She never commented. Never liked. But she read everything. By week's end, Ruth joined George at the town property office. She asked questions Emma didn't understand, about easements, conditional rights, public maintenance codes. George simply pointed to a form and said, "It's out there, waiting to lapse." They left the office with a copy of the lease agreement and a stack of official notices. That night, George laid the documents on the table while Emma poured 3 glasses of iced tea. The room was quiet but charged, like the moments before an Arizona storm breaks. Ruth ran her fingers along the date at the top. 30 days left. If they forget to renew. George smiled at Ruth and says quietly, then maybe it's time we bought ourselves a little peace. In a dusty real estate office tucked between a thrift shop and a diner, George signs the papers that change everything. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to ledger books and wooden file drawers. A ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, ticking with each rotation. George Langston sat across from a man in a tan blazer and bolo tie, the kind of tie people wore more for heritage than style. Mr. Avery, the town's retired broker and a longtime diner regular, tapped the corner of the file folder with one yellowed fingernail. "You sure about this, George? It ain't every day someone buys the road in front of their house." George nodded slowly, his voice low but certain. "Sometimes, the quietest move makes the loudest point." Avery chuckled. "That sounds like something your daddy would have said." He pushed the papers across the desk. "Sign here. Initial there. We'll file it with the county by Friday." George signed in the same calm, steady handwriting he used for loan approvals at the bank. As he passed the last page back, Avery opened a nearby drawer and pulled out a wooden plaque wrapped in yellowed tissue paper. "Found this a while back, after they renamed your block Crescent Ridge Lane. Figured someone would come along who'd earn the original." He handed George an old metal street sign. The letters read, "Crescent Glen Drive, established 1963. George traced the paint with his thumb. Back at Betty's diner, Emma sat at a booth near the window, nursing a coffee that had long gone cold. She watched her father step out of Avery's office, the morning sun casting his shadow long across the sidewalk. She didn't wave, but he saw her. Nodded once. That was enough. Later that day, Ruth joined George in the home office, the dining table now cleared of placemats and covered in legal forms. Together, they completed the paperwork to establish Langston Family Trust, which would hold ownership of parcel #408B, the very segment of road in front of their home. "It's not about revenge," Ruth said as she reviewed the access clause one last time. "No," George replied. "It's about boundary lines. Legal ones." She slid the final form into a manila envelope and sealed it with practiced precision. Meanwhile, Emma updated Crescent Watch. She didn't name names. She never did. But the post was simple. Power doesn't always come from noise. Sometimes, it comes from knowing what's yours. Lindsay Huxley read it in silence that evening, alone in her car parked under a flickering streetlight. Her thumb hovered over the comment button. Then she locked the screen. Sharon, for her part, had begun to notice George's silence. No rebuttals. No arguments at the HOA meetings. He simply listened. Smiled faintly. Went back to his yard. He trimmed his hedges with more care than before. Watered plants in the early morning while Sharon drove by in her spotless SUV. He didn't wave. He didn't frown. He just tended his garden. The mail arrived the next Thursday in a plain white envelope addressed to the board of the Crescent Glen Homeowners Association. Inside was a formal notice, typed neatly, signed by George Langston, trustee. Effective immediately, access to parcel #408B will be subject to homeowner-issued conditions. Any enforcement activities or administrative actions on said property must be preceded by written request and response. Ruth reviewed it twice before George mailed it. "It's firm," she said. "But not combative." "Good," George replied. "That's the tone we're after." The following Monday, during the HOA board's monthly meeting, Sharon opened the letter at the head of the folding table in the community center. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. She read the first paragraph once, then again. Her jaw tightened. Tommy Caldwell cleared his throat. "That official?" Sharon didn't answer. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in a manila folder labeled Legal Matters, and looked up at the room. Her fingers tremble, but her smile remains fixed. The HOA board unfolds the official letter, and gasps. George has declared the street segment conditionally accessible. The morning sun filtered through thinning sycamore leaves, casting lacy shadows across the picnic tables and fold-out chairs arranged in the community park. Paper cups of lukewarm lemonade sweated on plastic tablecloths printed with faux wood grain. Sharon stood at the head of the gathering, her blouse perfectly pressed, her smile tight, the official letter in hand, creased once, maybe twice. Residents shifted in their seats. Some wore expressions of vague concern. Others looked cautiously curious. Geraldine fanned herself with a bingo flyer. Tommy Caldwell tugged at the brim of his Crescent Glen ball cap. Sharon cleared her throat. We've received a letter from the Langston household, specifically, Mr. George Langston, acting trustee of a private family trust. Her voice softened slightly on the word trustee, as if offering a lesson in irony. It regards Parcel 408B, previously treated as common access. A ripple moved through the folding chairs. George, sitting beside Ruth, didn't shift. His fingers rested calmly on his knees. Sharon continued, it states that the property will remain accessible, conditionally. She paused, waiting for murmurs that didn't come. Which means, moving forward, enforcement officers, meaning HOA representatives, must request formal access before issuing any citations on that stretch of road. Ruth raised her hand, then stood. The request must be made in writing, per municipal land use policy. Response time is 48 hours. These terms follow the code section outlined in the county ordinance, and they've been filed properly. Sharon opened her mouth to respond, but George stood first. No one's blocking anything, he said gently. We're simply ensuring the rules apply evenly. On all sides. Across the circle, Mr. Harold Finch, former HOA president, now mostly retired to crossword puzzles and chess, nodded to himself but said nothing. Sharon's gaze swept over him, then flicked to Lindsay, seated quietly behind the juice table. Lindsay didn't meet her eyes. She was holding her phone vertically, screen open to her camera app. Tommy leaned toward Geraldine and whispered something that made her cover her mouth to stifle a laugh. Sharon's jaw tightened. Let's move on, she said. The rest of the meeting passed with mechanical updates, dog leash reminders, upcoming fall decorations, a brief mention of acceptable Halloween colors. But tension lingered, thick as dust on unused rules. Later that afternoon, Ruth found a new pink slip clipped to their garden gate. Non-compliant garden gnome. Unauthorized decoration. The gnome in question was nestled between marigolds and a weathered solar lantern. He wore a faded blue cap and held a fishing pole with the line tangled in a tiny rubber duck. He'd been there for 8 years. No one had ever complained. That evening, Emma sat on the porch swing, fingers flying over her laptop keyboard. The wind carried scents of baked earth and distant barbecue smoke. Her blog post went live at 7:03 p.m. The title, The Gnome Wars Begin. She uploaded a photo of the little gnome, citation in the foreground. The tone was calm, but pointed. Her closing line read, if harmony includes silence, then even the quietest corners are at risk. The comments rolled in faster than usual. Neighbors shared similar stories. One had been fined for mismatched potted plants. Another for hosting an unscheduled book club. The tone shifted from amused to exasperated. Across town, Lindsay sat on her porch steps, thumbing through the new post. She hesitated. Then opened her camera app again. Zoomed in on her mother's HOA notes. Clicked. A comment appears on the blog, she's done this before. Need help? Posted anonymously. The HOA sends out a bulletin, Emergency Town Assembly, attendance mandatory. Printed in all caps and slid into mailboxes without warning, the notice was met with a chorus of raised eyebrows across Crescent Glen. A few muttered it was overdue. Most simply grumbled. Emma found hers curled at the edges, already damp with the morning dew, stuck between the penny saver and a coupon for gutter cleaning. Tommy Caldwell slapped his copy on the Langston's porch table with a snort. Feels less like a meeting, more like a sermon, he muttered, adjusting the elastic band of his folding chair as he settled in for coffee. George nodded slowly, eyes scanning the letter while Ruth poured from a fresh pot. They hadn't even made it to breakfast before the HOA had summoned the entire community. By 6 that evening, the community center hummed with warm bodies and low conversation. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting a pale sheen across metal folding chairs arranged in stiff rows. On the walls, newly printed posters read "Order is Dignity" in bold navy letters. Dry cookies sat untouched beside a coffee urn that hissed as if exhausted from the week. Geraldine clutched her handbag like a shield. Mr. Finch, cardigan neatly buttoned, sat in the front row, pen poised over a yellow legal pad. Dr. Patel arrived late, slipping quietly into a seat in the back. He nodded at no one. He hadn't attended a meeting in years. Sharon stood at the front, her heels silent on the polished linoleum. "Good evening," she began, voice smooth as lacquered wood. "As many of you know, we are facing a period of unusual disruption." Emma could feel Ruth's sigh beside her before she heard it. "We have a situation," Sharon continued, "involving property rights, loopholes, and individuals who believe personal interest supersedes community integrity." Her eyes drifted, pointedly, toward the Langstons. George stood slowly. "I believe," he said evenly, "that community integrity includes clarity and fairness." Sharon didn't flinch. "Weaponizing technicalities is not fairness." Ruth stood beside her husband. Section 8.1 of the HOA bylaws allows any member to propose policy updates, provided they follow proper filing procedures. Tommy let out a low whistle. "Sounds like someone's finally read the handbook." A few neighbors chuckled. Sharon's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Garcia raised her hand. "I got fined for a fall wreath that wasn't on the approved design list. My mother made that wreath." Another voice from the back: "They made me repaint my mailbox because the shade was too cheerful." "What does that even mean?" Geraldine's voice trembled, but held. "I've lived here 37 years. Never once had a problem until Sharon took over. Now I'm fined for hanging my Sunday flag 2 hours early." Emma stepped forward. She held her phone, reading aloud from Crescent Watch. "We've received over 30 anonymous accounts. Citations for wind chimes, garden stones, lawn chairs, even sidewalk chalk." The murmurs grew louder. Then Mr. Finch stood. His cane clicked softly against the tile. "This HOA no longer serves the people. It serves itself." Silence fell like a blanket. Even Sharon stood still. Her hand, resting on the agenda folder, twitched slightly. In the row behind, Emma felt a tap on her arm. Lindsay handed her a folded note, eyes never leaving the front. Emma opened it discreetly. "Tomorrow. Noon. My place. Don't tell anyone." As people began rising from their chairs, Sharon leaned close to Lindsay, her voice low and bitter. "If you ever speak against me, you'll regret it." Lindsay flinches. Lindsay leads Emma through a side door into her mother's office. "You didn't get this from me," she says, unlocking the drawer. The latch clicked, brittle in the stillness. The room was cooler than the rest of the house, insulated by heavy curtains and silence. The carpet muffled their steps as they moved past the glossy desk and towards a waist-high cabinet with brass handles. On the walls hung a series of framed plaques: Excellence in Community Leadership, Neighborhood Visionary, and other self-bestowed honors that glinted faintly under the single desk lamp. Emma glanced around the space. Every drawer was labeled: vendor, legal, fines, active, fines, archived. There were color-coded folders, matching ink colors, and a faint scent of air freshener that smelled like canned lilac and control. Lindsay knelt and opened the bottom drawer. "She doesn't trust the cloud," she muttered. "Still keeps it all on paper." Emma stepped beside her, holding the flashlight from her phone low. Lindsay pulled out a leather-bound ledger, thick and worn, the kind with fabric tabs and a slightly bowed spine. She handed it over without a word. George's voice echoed in Emma's memory: "Power without receipts is just a story. Let's find the paper trail." Emma sat carefully on the edge of the desk while Lindsay stood watch at the window. The first page was meticulous: dates, amounts, payees. But by page 10, things shifted. A payment for $1,600 listed under Community Refreshments, June. No receipts. No vendor name. Then came decorative landscape maintenance, $9,400 with a note, approved by SH. Ruth arrived 10 minutes later, slipping in through the same side door with a slim messenger bag over her shoulder. "Let me see," she said softly, adjusting her reading glasses as she took the ledger from Emma. Her eyes scanned fast, hands steady. "Here," Ruth whispered, tapping a section with her finger. "Consultant, Rose Myers." "That's Sharon's maiden name, isn't it?" Lindsay, still watching from the window, nodded. "She says it was branding advice. But I've never heard of anyone meeting her." The documents grew worse. Invoices from a landscaping company that wasn't registered with the county. The owner's name, Elliot G. Huxley, matched Sharon's nephew. No license number. No contractor ID. Ruth pulled out her phone and began photographing each page, working methodically. "She's taken the HOA fund from $3,000 in fines to over $110,000, in 1 quarter. Her voice was low, even, but sharp. And she hasn't reported a single board vote for these expenses." Footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway, Betty from the diner, calling out through the screen door. "Sharon? Brought that apple pie I promised." Lindsay froze. "Don't answer." They waited until Betty's steps retreated, her car rolling slowly down the drive. Emma leaned over the desk, her breath short. "This one's marked Community Engagement Dinner, Rosario's Steakhouse, $2,400. Ruth didn't look up. No board minutes mention it. No RSVP list. No photos. Emma met her eyes. "You're saying this could be fraud?" Ruth whispered. Lindsay stepped toward them, clutching a framed photo from the bookshelf, her mother and father, younger, smiling in front of a now-raised garden. She stared at it a moment, then set it down gently. She wasn't always like this. The front door creaked. A car door slammed shut. Lindsay whispers, "She's home." Sharon stands at the podium, flanked by banners reading HOA Vision 2024, Preserving Excellence. Her smile doesn't reach her eyes. She adjusted the microphone twice, even though no one had spoken yet. Her blouse was crisp, her earrings tasteful, but the crease between her eyebrows betrayed what her smile tried to hide. The folding chairs in the Crescent Glen Community Center creaked as residents settled in. The scent of cider bubbled faintly from a crockpot at the back table, clashing awkwardly with the antiseptic smell of the room's freshly mopped floor. Emma sat between her parents, hands folded in her lap, watching. She remembered something Sharon had said once, in a moment that now rang ominous: "Reputation is everything. And I intend to keep mine flawless." Now that reputation stood on the precipice of collapse. Sharon tapped her note cards lightly and began. "We gather tonight during an unfortunate time of unrest," she said, her voice smooth but with clipped undertones. "A small number of residents have chosen to undermine the unity we've worked so hard to preserve. They've spread misinformation. Questioned leadership. We must not let division take root." Murmurs stirred through the audience. Tommy leaned toward Dr. Patel and whispered something that earned a rare smile. Mrs. Garcia dabbed at her eyes even before anything had been said. Lindsay sat in the third row, spine straight, lips pressed together. George stood slowly. "Miss Huxley," he said evenly. "Could you speak to the HOA's recent expenditures? Specifically the jump in administrative reimbursements?" Sharon blinked. "All expenditures are approved through standard board procedures." Ruth raised a hand. "As per the bylaws, any resident may request an itemized financial review when expenditures exceed 25% of quarterly norms." "I see where this is going," Sharon snapped, but the edges of her voice were fraying. "This is an ambush, not a meeting." George stepped aside as Ruth placed a slim laptop on the edge of the podium. She connected it to the community projector. The screen flickered. A spreadsheet appeared. The title, HOA Financial Summary, Jan-September 2023. Ruth's voice remained calm. "These are the official records sent to residents. Now let's compare them to the ledger provided by a concerned member of this board." Gasps murmured through the crowd. The spreadsheet split on the screen, 2 columns. Same months. Different totals. $3,200 in reported fines. $112,000 in actual deposits. Ruth pointed at the screen. Note the consultant payments. No attached scope of work. Vendor names that link back to family members. Mrs. Garcia rose to her feet, her voice trembling. I was fined $600 for a bush that wasn't even over the line. That same week I got my second chemo infusion. Silence fell. Then Lindsay stood. Her hands held the leather-bound ledger. The one Emma had seen. The one that should have remained hidden. She walked slowly to the front. You told me rules protected people, she said, voice cracking but clear. But all they did was protect you. She opened the ledger, turned to a marked page, and held it up beside the screen. Line by line, Lindsay continued. This one says, community dinner, but there was no dinner. This one says landscape bonus, the vendor's not licensed. This one, she hesitated, then held it steady, this one was to yourself. Sharon's breath hitched. She looked around the room. Dozens of eyes, once politely distant, now stared directly at her. I built this from nothing, she snapped. You think you can take it from me? Dr. Patel stood next. His voice was soft but firm. No one person should own a community. The room held its breath. Mr. Finch rose with effort and walked to the center aisle. According to Section 3 of the bylaws, he said, holding up a folded paper, we may call a vote of no confidence in any sitting board member under suspicion of misconduct. I hereby call for that vote. All in favor, raise your hand. For a second, no one moved. Then Mrs. Garcia's hand went up. Then Geraldine. Then Tommy. Then the whole room. Including Lindsay. Mr. Finch calls for a vote of no confidence. Hands rise, dozens, then everyone, including Lindsay. Pumpkin lanterns glow along Langston Lane. Emma helps a child tie a string of paper leaves across the mailbox post, no citation in sight. The crisp October air smelled of cider and cinnamon. Leaves crunched under every step, the kind that made you slow your walk just to hear the sound. Crescent Glen's Fall Fest was in full swing, and for the first time in years, the laughter outshouted the rules. Emma tied off the last knot on the garland as the boy gave her a toothy grin before running off, face streaked with orange and black paint. Across the street, a small hay bale photo booth had popped up, nestled in the same exact spot where she'd once discovered her first pink slip. Now it was filled with children in flannel shirts, balancing gourds and making silly faces behind fake mustaches. She stood back and looked around. Folding chairs lined the sidewalks, feet tapping to the slow twang of a banjo trio playing beneath a string of fairy lights. Neighbors mingled between booths, Betty's Pie Station, the cider stand, and a pie-judging table stacked with crusts both golden and slightly burned. Mr. Finch stood near the new community board, surrounded by fresh faces. He beamed as Ruth handed him a clipboard. A clean slate, he said. Feels good. Near the main tent, George held up a small brass plaque, the crowd quieting as he approached the portable podium. I wasn't looking to make a point, he began, but it turned out we needed one. He turned the plaque for all to see. This street belongs to the people who stood up when it mattered. Applause rippled, carried by a wind that sent leaves dancing across the pavement. Tommy wiped his glasses. Could have used this kind of spirit when we fought the tree trimming ordinance, he said, nudging Mrs. Yu, who laughed into her sleeve. Betty called out from behind the pie table, everyone gets a slice tonight. Even the ones who voted against my lemon meringue last year. Emma smiled and snapped a photo, Betty raising her pie server like a trophy, George looking slightly embarrassed, Ruth applauding beside Lindsay, who wore a simple white name tag that read, Interim Secretary. Later, Emma uploaded her final blog post. The headline read, Crescent Glen belongs to the people again. She set the phone aside and looked out over the gathering. Children chalked smiley faces on the sidewalk. No one rushed them. No one measured distances or called anything non-compliant. Ruth and George danced slowly near the community booth, just a few steps, the way older couples do when the rhythm matters less than the moment. The fairy lights shimmered above the new street sign, Langston Lane, fresh paint, straight mount, and soft bulbs strung gently around it like garland. Lindsay approached Emma near the cider stand, brushing powdered sugar off her coat. "You showed me how to speak," she said. "I just had to believe it mattered." Emma took a sip of cider, warmth pooling in her chest. "You did more than speak. You chose." The sun dipped behind the rooftops. Dusk softened the colors. And in that gentle hush, Emma watched as a little girl knelt near the mailbox and began to draw flowers, stars, a bright pink heart in chalk. No one stopped her. No one hovered. She smiled and kept drawing. Back inside, Emma's phone buzzed with a new comment on the blog. "Hi. I'm from Willow Creek. We have a Sharon too. Could you help us?" As autumn settled over Crescent Glen, what once was a street marked by fear and fines now echoed with laughter, lanterns, and the smell of fresh pie. The transformation wasn't sudden, it came with quiet courage, shared glances, and one brave stand after another. Sometimes, the strongest kind of order comes not from rules, but from neighbors who remember what it means to care. When power forgets its purpose, community must become its compass. And perhaps, like a porch light left on for someone returning home, the smallest stand for fairness can illuminate the way for many.